morning, people of the internet. You're listening to Debi Radio 79.5 FM, a podcast where we discuss the movie Grosse Pointe Blank, 1 minute at a time. I'm your co-host, Dev.
And I'm your other co-host, Hugh, and we are today on the show going to be looking at minute 77 of the film. Yes, we are at that point. We've come a long way. We are at the school reunion dance, and at the beginning of this minute, we have two very well-known actors going literally head to head in the shot, and that is Cudlitz and Cusack, while Minnie Driver looks off to one side.
And joining us back again today, we have Robert Chandler of Space Age Films. Robert is an award-winning producer, writer, director, working in film, television, and animation.
Yeah.
Welcome back, Rob.
Thank you very much.
So,
we do like a tongue twister. It's always good to confound people.
So Rob, yesterday you were saying you saw this film on opening day.
Yeah.
Huge Clash fan, and your moment of joy at seeing Joe Strummer's name right at the top of the film, right? Like it's that opening sequence as we're looking at the cyclist through the window
Yeah.
as they're coming down towards the hotel.
Yes.
What expectations did it set for you that Joe Strummer did the composition and scoring for it in terms of, what the music would be like for the film, but also the content of the film in general? As you said, the Clash had only really done punk documentaries up to this point. So
Yeah, well, the expectation was perhaps too high. Because being a Clash fan, and we're talking about someone who has the name of the band tattooed on his arm. They changed my life. I absolutely love them. Everything about them, I love. I saw them in concert many times. So the love is real, is what I'm saying. And Strummer was in the wilderness. He made the mistake after getting rid of Mick Jones and the whole debacle of the follow up Clash Mark II, as we call them, the album that was released, which I'm not even going to say its name. And then the sort of watching Mick Jones, attain a lot of success with Big Audio Dynamite. And Strummer was in the wilderness. There's no doubt about it. He possibly needed it because of the pressure that had been brought to bear on him. We mustn't forget that, as punk was a much bigger revolution than the punks were expecting it to be, and Joe was seen as the intelligence, the mouthpiece, and that brings a certain amount of pressure. And so I can imagine him being slightly relieved when it all crashed and died for him in 1984, 85. I can't even, normally I know all my dates, but it's such a traumatic moment for me.
Rob.
The date when they actually stopped, the Clash Mark II, when they stopped. And so, we kept an eye on Joe. We want him to be all right. We being the collective Clash fans, we were happy to go along with what Mick Jones was up to. But Strummer released his own solo album, Earthquake Weather. It wasn't very good. Musically, he needed Mick. Lyrically, he didn't. I think it would have been better published as a pamphlet, frankly, that album. Because the lyrics are really nice and they're very good. And you get what Joe always loved doing, which is walking around a city, observing, writing poetry, touch of Kerouac, and a touch of world saving, but a bit wiser and older, and understanding that he wasn't going to save the world. So that fed into that solo album. Like I said, it wasn't particularly good, but at least it was there. And then he was again back into the wilderness, and then he came re-emerged for Alex Cox to do that song "Love Kills" for the film "Love Kills" in some places, Sid and Nancy and others. And the song was good. We liked it. The B-side was very good as well. So there were little things happening. Then he did a film called Permanent Record, which is a really touching film, which not many people have been to see. And of course, Nerd here went to see it at I think it was in the London Film Festival. So I saw it before it was released because of Joe. And I know that Joe took that film because it deals with the suicide of a young man, and Joe's own brother had committed suicide. It was Joe had to go and identify the body. And so these are all traumatic things that he never really talked about or even put into his songs. But I think that's why he took the Permanent Record job, and he does a really good job. Actually, the side one are all Joe Strummer songs, and they're pretty good. And the film's quite touching. It's a low key independent film. Keanu Reeves, young Keanu Reeves is in it.
Yes.
And so in a way, when was Permanent Record? End of the 80s. There
Yes.
was this sort of wilderness. Then the Walker soundtrack. Now that's another thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, he did. Because of Love Kills, he then did Straight to Hell. Maybe inadvisedly, but everybody was inadvisedly involved in that film. And frankly, if any of us had been asked to go and join that uh, ensemble fiasco, we would all be going.
We'd have gone.
How would you not? Yeah, it sounds brilliant. Alex Cox, dude, Joe Strummer, Elvis Costello as a magician, the Pogues.
Yeah.
Um,
Pogues.
yeah, Courtney Love. Of course,
Yeah.
we're there for it. And so Joe kept having these sort of not quite big enough hits, and then Grosse Pointe Blank came along, 1997. And so the expectation was sort of both high and low. I thought it might be another low key independent. We were all getting a bit fed up with Pulp Fiction, the children of Pulp Fiction, let's call it. And then seeing his name there just gave me great joy. Seeing and hearing the Minnie Driver just mentioning the Clash out loud on screen was a very big moment for me. Very big. There are Clash things all around the place. There's a Clash poster on her bedroom wall. In the lockers, it says the future is unwritten, which at the time, wasn't so well known. Of course, now we all know it's the Joe Strummer documentary. Back then, it was simply the words on the front of the Know Your Rights single. That's all they were. So it was a little tiny thing, but to a Clash fan, zoom, we home in on that and say, oh yeah, there's another little reference. And then hearing the music and think, well, this is actually quite good. The music that is played when Joe's dropping the poison down the line or the wire to kill that is brilliant. It works so well. I was very excited by this point. When Cusack pours whiskey on his father's grave, you get a little Joe Strummer vocal from a song that doesn't exist. You can't find that anywhere. Believe me, I've
Oh
looked.
wow.
Yeah, so
Wow.
it was a big treat, and then to hear the Clash, and then the rest of the soundtrack, which I know he would have made with Cusack and with Kathy Nelson, one of the great music supervisors, to hear the Violent Femmes, and Susie and the Banshees, but not Hong Kong Garden, but Citizen Dust, fantastic, Bring It On, and the beat,
Yep.
all these great songs. And so my expectation was like really cautious and worried and impossibly high, and then the film delivered. Oh my god, it actually delivered, and it was fantastic, and I'm in love with everybody in it, and it, boy, does it deliver. So I was very happy by the time I walked out at the end.
Fantastic. Oh, you really take me back to those days of discovering film in the cinema, and the joy, the momentary, the kind of the trepidation followed by the joy.
Yeah.
When something exceeds your expectations and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, and you
And
want
you
to tell
just sort of
everyone
think,
about it, but we didn't have podcasts back then, or
no,
social
we
media or
didn't.
anything.
No, that's what we had. I mean, you had to like use Zines or go down the pub or just find ways to communicate. And to be honest, that's probably the thing I miss the most these days. I don't miss a lot about the cinema experience. Cinemas have become impersonal
Yeah,
and large and noisy and smelly and unpleasant and not in a grindhouse way. And poorly run and poorly lit
yeah,
and the bulbs are clearly fading and all the
yeah.
rest of it. But what I do miss is the bit afterwards. I miss that bit where you would, having seen the movie, you walk out with your friends, you're talking, you go to the loo, you meet up again, and then you go find somewhere to sit, drink, eat,
And
talk.
talk about it all evening. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's the bit I miss, is that part of it where you can get in, you can do what we're doing now.
Yeah,
This
Yeah.
is what I do now instead. But I feel sorry for some of the kids I teach because they don't get that experience now. Everything there's a huge world of media available to them.
yeah.
They
And
can dial up almost anything.
Oh,
for me
I
as
mean,
well, it makes
yeah,
films a lot less memorable
it
because
does.
for me, if I watch a film, great, I'm not going to remember it. If I watch a film and then spend a couple hours chatting with friends about it, it locks in those memories, and I actually will retain that
Mm.
film for a much longer period. And films that I see these days, I very rarely remember much of the detail of them unless I go back and rewatch them a couple times.
It,
I mean, I think this is one of the reasons I really enjoyed your film, Rob, the Christmas Number One, because I think part of what I made it work for me was knowing that I had you to talk to
Yep.
and others to talk to online who'd been part of the film, but also knowing that having seen it, the film would appeal to people I knew.
Yeah.
And because there is, it's not just a rom-com, it's not just it doesn't just have that beautifully handled streak of tragedy that runs through it. It's also a love letter to London,
Hmm.
to the music industry in London,
Yep.
to people who are in the media. And wasn't in the music business. I was in the DVD and film, but I recognized moments and feelings of the characters and that sense of place, and late night bars around Camden and places like that that were part and parcel of all of that sort of milieu. Um, and I think that's the thing with Grosse Pointe. I think we've got Cusack and his friends who've all grown up in Michigan, who, yes, they're doing it in LA because they've got a budget and they can't afford to go out there and all the rest of it, but they are trying to. And as you said, it's very much Main Street USA. It's very much kind of you know th- the parts of this that are rom-com are more hallmarky, and then the parts of this that are thrillery are shot in a more noir style and use older buildings.
Yep.
But that, the fact is though that this is still very much. I imagine I'm not from Michigan, but I suspect that this is still very relatable
Yeah.
for people from
I
that
mean,
time period and place.
I could almost imagine a scene in this film, somewhat tongue in cheek, where he goes to a cinema to see something,
Yeah.
and
Watch the Samurai.
yeah, especially like something Ronin or Samurai-esque would be
Yeah.
so fitting for the meta of the film.
Well,
But
I mean, Costner does that in The Bodyguard, doesn't he?
He does. He goes
He
to
and Whitney
see
Houston go,
Jimbo.
yeah, and when they come out, they're talking about
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
and having that conversation like we would, and yeah, and because of his job and what he does, he can speak with a degree of authority about it, which is
Yeah. And to
obviously
a
not
degree,
something most of us can do.
he's self-romanticizing, isn't he? But
Yeah,
how can you not if you go and see Yojimbo? Of course, you're like,
yeah,
I'm to share in my funerals. My funerals, what I do. I'm a bodyguard. So you're sort of
yeah,
self-romanticizing, and Cusack is almost that. He dresses all in
yes,
black, and
yes,
but he dresses well for the time, 1990. You can
yes,
tell by the cut of the suit, the shoulders, the slightly too
yes,
long sleeves. You can tell
yeah,
it's 1997 by that suit. And if you look at the other kids in the school, they don't have the same access probably to money that he has
yeah,
to buy, of the moment clothes. But
yeah,
but
very true.
I think it's a strength that he doesn't really self mythologize the way that Costner does.
No,
Um,
that's true.
it allows him to. He's almost neutral, and that's where the character is. It's what I was
Mm,
saying about the two paintings with the boats. Sort of which
yes,
direction do I go, right or wrong, to kill or to love? And so he's quite neutrally played all the way through it. It's the other people around him
yes,
who get to. Joan Cusack on the phone gets angrier with the munitions supplier than Cusack ever does with anything that's going on
mm,
in his life. Dan
that's
Aykroyd,
true.
and we should talk about Dan Aykroyd because
Ah,
he's in the second or third scene, and it's a great scene. He's on the phone to him, and they're both pretending to be somewhere else, and of course they're not. And we all love Dan Aykroyd because we love the Blues Brothers, and we love Ghostbusters, and we love Dan just for being
yes,
Dan. And
yeah,
he comes in and immediately lets you know that the film's going to be all right, and you can laugh at
yeah,
it, and it's actually going to be quite good fun.
yeah,
And he does
yeah,
it
that's true.
brilliantly, and he does that, and then he leaves, and then he pops up again with his brown paper bag through the.
And that's the thing, isn't it? Those are the thriller parts, and
Yeah.
then the film is. I don't know how intentionally this is in terms of Armitage, but because in the script it doesn't feel segmented in this way, but it's very much. I keep talking about it as two genres, and the film is these two genres that eventually collide in a few minutes from now. But there's this slow working up to that point, and you know we have this really interesting red lighting in the dance in the dance scene here,
Mhm.
and we've just seen a couple of characters talk to our leads, Martin and Debbie, and then one of them's gone off to get shot down again by the queen bee on the
Yep.
dance floor. And then straight away we cut to a high shot. We're up in the bleachers, we're looking down
Yeah, with
because
Debbie
this
and
is
Martin. Yeah.
yeah, this is a really strange school hall because it's almost like a theater
Yeah.
as well as also maybe possibly somewhere that does basketball. I don't know,
Well,
but then
perfect.
yeah,
I'm sorry to break in there, Hugh, but I'm sorry,
oh
but
sure,
their vantage point is perfect for a hitman. That's
oh
exactly where a
absolutely,
hitman would
yeah,
position himself.
yeah, it's perfect for them,
And
and then we
Cusack's
get
in
that.
that position, and Deb is with him,
Yes,
and she doesn't know that, okay, this is a perfect position for a hitman because she still hasn't.
exactly. She
But I
hasn't
also think
swinged.
it's what they would have done as high schoolers, right? They
Yeah,
would have
Yes,
slightly removed themselves. They would
yeah,
have been the ones sat at the back of class, you know, slightly deriding everything about the
yeah.
situation that they're in.
oh, been there, done that.
Yeah, so we've all been there.
Abs-
And that's
just
why we're
yeah,
doing this podcast.
Well,
exactly.
that's the other thing
Yeah.
I wanted to say is, and I'm going to bring it round to the Clash again. It's because of the song "Rudy Can't Fail." It is
Mm,
about the outsider, and I think Cusack sees himself as that. He sees himself as a rude boy within the
mm,
context of that sort of Main Street USA. He's the guy who doesn't fit in, the outsider. Rudy cannot fail. Rudy can't fail. One of the great Clash songs, and it's used so judiciously in the film that it
mm.
has to be deliberate. I associate it with Cusack's character, and it's what I was saying about him being the coolest guy there. He is the
Yeah,
rude boy, but nobody else is on the same wavelength, so they don't even understand his level of cool. Um,
that's true.
and again, that song helped feed that, and the
Mm.
music throughout. The music's much cooler than people probably would have been listening to in that
Yeah,
town in Michigan in the late
yeah,
90s.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it's way too cool. for,
There's
for-
yeah,
it's like a
there's a
music, it's like a dream, playlist,
yeah,
frankly.
yeah.
isn't it? There's a couple of nods to more mainstream, I feel, with
Yes.
Aha and the
Faith
Bangles, but
and
Aha, and the
yeah,
Bangles, yeah, and that's why I love Nena and 99 Red Balloons because
yeah. But
yeah,
there's also a bit of '90s stuff with Faith No More and a couple of other things here
yeah,
and there, just a
the
few
Eels,
touches.
yeah. But even
Yeah,
the
but
Eels is pretty out there.
yeah, yeah. I mean, the Eels struck gold here first, didn't they? Before they went over there, and it's
Yeah.
back there, and it's like, I always feel, yeah, it's one of those American bands that feels like we discovered them, like the Pixies.
yeah,
Britain discovered them, and then they became a hit elsewhere. So yeah, it is, as you say, super cool. But then this brings us back. So in the last two episodes, the last couple of episodes, you've mentioned Kathy Nelson.
yeah,
We've mentioned her briefly as well, very early on in
good.
the podcast series. But it's you know more about the music business than us. I noticed that her early credits are not simply as a music consultant, but specifically for MCA Records.
Yeah, which is where
So
she was working. Yeah.
right, so I assume that she's music biz first, and then finds her way into the film
I
business.
think that's right. I don't know the detail, but I'm pretty sure she
Sure.
was asked to select some tracks for a film, and then before she knew it, it was starting to become a full-time job. Up until then, films were using songs. I mean, some films were
Mhm.
built around songs, like American Graffiti, but
Mm.
generally, the mainstream films weren't. They had scores
Mm.
and a
Mhm.
song that might be composed for the end titles or for a midpoint moment. And what Kathy did was sort of be part of that movement of the soundtrack, like
Yeah.
Singles obviously is a great film and a great soundtrack. The two go hand in hand. It's Seattle, it's grunge,
Yes.
it's all there. I think she worked on that as well. And Grosse Pointe Blank has that vibe, and it was at a time, of course, before iTunes and Spotify, and a good compilation album was worth its weight in gold.
Mm.
So the soundtrack album was a way for the studio to recoup some money, but it also meant the songs had a value, and often the artists were reluctant to give up their songs because there was still a divide, a preciousness about music. We don't want it tied to a particular image. It's a song; it shouldn't have images
Mm.
attached to it. Quite preciousness, especially given the rise of MTV and the music video. But the artist wanted to be in control, and so often, we also had the artists. Some artists were suing. Tom Waits famously sued an advertisement for reproducing his voice on a commercial to make
Mhm.
it sound like him. So studios were very cautious about getting bands to provide songs, and it was Kathy who was at the sort of spearhead of breaking that down because she had very good relationships with the band. She had a strong relationship with Joe Strummer.
Mm.
He would hang out with her. When he was recording Earthquake Weather, he spent time with Kathy Nelson, and she put the time in just working with bands and understanding bands and artists, and that really helped. So but when she rang and said, "Look, we'd really like to use your song," it wasn't some guy in a suit in a studio. And how much
Mm.
can we charge you for this? Oh, you couldn't possibly afford it. There was none of that. It was a much more informal. It's Kathy Nelson. Yeah, okay, we'll do it. Oh, it's a cool film. We can both benefit from this. And so she was responsible for sort of breaking the rules, really. Just as the music industry
Mm.
was collapsing generally anyway, there was Napster coming. The industry felt it could cope with the idea of streaming and all of this, and it was in disarray. And Kathy just brought it all together brilliantly. And the history of Kathy Nelson is the history of American cinema. Really, if you look at the work she did, it's peerless, and we have to be thankful to her.
Well, it's funny you say that because from lived experience, I always think of the 1-2 whammy of Beverly Hills Cop and Ghostbusters as
Yep.
being those albums where you're like, oh, okay, I'm buying this for the songs because the songs are actually in the film,
Yeah.
and the album is the songs instead of scores,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
But I am fascinated to realize that Beverly Hills Cop was her second
Right.
Hmm.
credit. Do you know
Yeah.
what her first credit was?
No.
Repo Man.
Oh, perfect. Well, that's
Yeah.
perfect.
Her and Alex Cox, and
Yeah.
she did Sid and Nancy as well.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that makes a lot of sense, and that maybe
It
had to
does,
be
doesn't it?
because of the relationship with Joe Strummer. Um,
Yep.
and most of those artists, most musicians are very cautious about the industry, whether it's the music industry, the
Hmm.
film industry, anything outside. They're all wiser now because they've had to
Yeah.
be, but back then they weren't. And Kathy broke that down, and Repo Man is a perfect
Mm.
first film for her.
Absolutely.
You know,
But then she carries on this really interesting balancing act
yeah,
between indie and mainstream. You know, she obviously, I mean, Bruckheimer came out of music as well, but it's
yeah,
interesting that from Beverly Hills Cop onwards, she works on Bruckheimer films regularly,
yep,
Days of Thunder, but then she'll go from Days of Thunder to Pump Up the Volume,
yeah, perfect,
you
yeah,
know, and then she'll go from Pump Up the Volume to Thelma and Louise and Point Break. You know, and it's back and forth and back and forth, and it just shows, and it's wonderful because I'm just looking at all of these soundtracks and thinking, oh yeah, that was a good soundtrack. And then she gets into hip hop and the hood, and we get Juice, and we get CB4, and we get, you know, she starts to just broaden the scope of who she's working with and how she's working with it. But then she will do something as unusual as period pieces, The Shawshank Redemption and Apollo 13,
nice,
where apparently she had an uncredited role in making sure that the kind of music that was appropriate to the era was there. And you suddenly think, wow, you know, this
yeah,
is just this woman has no what's the word I'm looking for? She's not precious about it. She's not
no.
precious about her talent. She's clearly somebody who just loves music.
Well, she's like us, we might
Yeah.
on the surface look like a punk rocker or a 50-year-old film guy, but our tastes are much wider than how we look. So
Yes.
when you listed those films, there wasn't a single film I wouldn't have joy watching.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't
It's
only
Absolutely.
need Repo Man films. I need Apollo 13.
Everything.
I need Pump
yeah.
Up the Volume. I need the
Yeah.
whole range. And so she was in the right place at the right time, and
Hmm.
boy did she deliver, and so she was constantly being employed and used, and in all the good ways, all the right ways,
Yeah.
by films. I think it's because of the relationship she had with artists would not go easy into a film studio back then and hand over their precious songs. Like I say, the Clash never did it for anybody. They really wouldn't.
Yeah.
This is the band that wouldn't go on Top of the Pops, so they weren't just going to give their
Yeah.
songs to anybody. But Kathy was able to do that, and we never resented it. We, being the Clash Collective, we never resented her, forging that relationship. Joe was writing the music. There it was in Grosse Pointe Blank, and it was a Clash kind of movie. My daddy was a bank robber. The romance of crime,
Mm.
and the heart of it, the romantic comedy of Martin and Debbie. It's a beautiful film.
Hmm.
I think we should call it a beautiful film. And people say, "Oh, it's got
Yes.
blood in it." Well, yes, but so has
No,
childbirth. This is a beautiful film.
yes. And that again, and funny enough, you mentioned childbirth, and of course, bringing us right back to our moment where we've met the baby, and Martin's had the moment, and now he and Debbie are sitting up top, bathed in red, soft
Yep.
orange light. And again, it's that wonderful thing of rom com meets thriller, as you said, for him this is the perfect vantage point.
Yes.
As Dev said, for her this is where they went. This is their spot, right?
Yeah.
Their moment to look down on everything, and they get a heart to heart. And there's something, and it's pure rom com.
Yeah.
This is Cusack's smile, Cusack's
Yeah.
face. This is a different Martin from the one we've
This
seen
is
in the
Cusack
film.
of the sure thing. Cusack of say anything.
Yes.
This is and
Yeah.
in Say Anything he wore a Clash t-shirt. We
Yeah.
noticed that as whenever I say we, I'm talking about the Clash collective.
There's a lot of you, Rob. There's a lot of you.
Oh, it's a joy to know that there is a lot of us because
Yes.
for any band to sustain this length is really what I think all bands secretly want. But
Yes.
yeah,
True.
so for Cusack to bring that sort of boyishness he still had,
Yes.
which is
Yes.
why and you might even say that Minnie have they infantilized her a little bit so that she's still living in her bedroom from the 80s. What
That's a
does she
good
want?
point.
What does she want from John when he walks in? Even though she runs back in and dives on the bed as if to be available to him.
Then she suddenly,
She wants an
yeah.
airplane. So
Yeah.
they're behaving like children, and it's brilliant. And it's better than watching a couple trying to have sex. That's icky.
Yeah, it's more personal.
It is. It is.
Yeah, I don't know. I think your point about infantilization is interesting because when we covered those minutes, I don't think I don't think any of us brought that up, Dev. We talked about the bedroom. We talked about the that why she was there because there is a line about her claiming that she's only back home in her own bedroom because there's been her actual apartment's been trashed in what's it called, the special night in on the
Devil's Night.
Crow. Devil's Night.
Devil's
It's
Night.
been trashed because of Devil's Night, and we were debating on this podcast whether or not that's true. Whether or not she actually had her own place as an independent woman
Yes. Well,
further in
look at her
Detroit, or
previous
was she always at home?
She had a previous marriage, didn't she? And
Well, supposedly, yeah, yeah.
and was that guy? Doesn't she call him a psychopath at one point?
I think so. And it's that
Something
really odd.
Well, she also levels that at John Cusack, and yet
Yes,
she might feel safe with Cusack in a way that she didn't feel safe with the other guy, and
yes,
so it's not explored, and it's quite handy as a screenwriter to be able to sort of toss that in and put it over there, just like living at home allows you to live in that big mansion, which is a dream to shoot in because there's all the space and so on and so on. That's fine. I don't mind
true,
the stuff being
true,
artificial. It's all
true.
films are artificial. Um,
That's true.
but yeah, it's the performance. Yes, it's
Yeah,
infantilizing her a bit, the sort of hiding in not the bleachers but the vantage point, the
yeah.
playing airplane, um having a bedroom. Obviously because it's stuck in the 80s, she has a out of Clash London Calling Out of Control poster on the wall, which is a very welcome. That would I have to say, if any girl had that in her bedroom, I would be very happy with that situation. I never encountered it. but
Oh, Rob.
but
Oh, you missed your moment, didn't
I
you?
did, but Minnie also brings a maturity to it, which sort of exceeds his. So he's very neutral. He's
Mm,
the guy who doesn't know which way to go. He's very neutral, morally neutral, emotionally neutral. When he's looking at the baby, what's he really feeling? He doesn't believe the mother saying, "Oh, it's brilliant. We're so free now that we're married," and you know that she's probably not wholly convinced by that.
mm,
Neither is he.
yeah,
But he's obviously having to consider, this is what the future could be. I could be a parent. I could actually have
yeah.
that responsibility. And who am I going to have that with? Well, the woman who just enters the shot, which is Debbie. And then it follows on with they have that vantage point. Then they're going up the stairs. There's another situation where we meet the bully,
Mm,
which could potentially end in violence. But Cusack is in control. He diffuses the situation. He doesn't rise to the guy taunting him about
mm,
my mind's gone blank or whatever it is he says. Doesn't rise
mm.
to it because he's with Debbie, and you start to see actually their relationship is going to work. He is.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and that's the thing. At this point in any rom com, either we put another challenge on the couple,
Yeah,
or we have to start pushing them together, and that's
that's
what's
right.
happening here. And I love the idea that she says that you're not damaged, just sprained.
Yeah,
There's a lovely, lovely way of phrasing it, and he's like, "What?" And she goes, "Nothing that can't be mended."
yeah,
And the problem is, and this is the thing about the having, pardon the pun, having the clash of genres, is that we know who Martin is
Yeah,
and what he's capable of, and we know he is still keeping that from Debbie,
that's right, and
and
that's the
and
thing.
and it, yeah, this is the tragedy of it. We know that at some point this is going to come out, and
Yeah,
it's not going to go well. And we that feeling, we are teetering on that edge where here we are in the romantic moment, but we just the thriller is just around the corner.
that's right.
This is going to go badly in some way, and I think there's something about. I mean, we're talking about the minutes afterwards, but there is something about the horror on Debbie's face after she
Hmm.
sees the fight, the
Yes,
aftermath. There is something about the look on Minnie Driver's face that is so real
it
that
is.
I keep wondering if they told her just go upstairs and see what we've
See,
got. I
yeah,
keep wondering how much of it is just sheer class and talent of being able to pull that out,
yes.
and how much of that was slightly staged. But it's so real, and it's so heartbreaking. It's such a
It is
heartbreaking,
heartbreaking. I remember
you
crying
know.
I
Yeah.
cry quite easily in films, and I remember crying in the cinema. Just a little weeping. Think, oh no, you spoiled it. Even though I knew it's like a heist movie. Okay, a heist movie only really kicks
Yes.
into gear when the heist goes wrong. We know that,
Yes.
and yet we still don't want it to
Yes.
go wrong because we like the guys who are pulling it off. Oh, it's gone wrong. And
Yes.
it's the
That's a
same with
good
this.
point.
It's like, oh no, no, don't. You're going to have to discover it at some point. We don't want you to discover it. Oh, and she's
Yeah.
discovered it, and he's at
Yeah.
his worst. He's beaten. There's blood, and he says, "This
Yeah.
isn't me." But it is him, and she has to deal with that. And I think again, her performance makes these scenes work. All of them. When she goes to his motel, and confronts him there, she makes that scene work. Excuse me, she makes that scene work.
Yes.
There's no way back until
Yes.
he opens the third act, basically, which is to see what his kill target is, and then that
Yes.
kicks the third act into gear. And again, he foregrounds the problem. What dumb luck this is. If you have a coincidence in a film, it's never going to play unless you admit it's a coincidence. So you always, as a writer,
Yes.
say, "Oh my goodness, I never thought this would ever happen. The two of us meeting on this train like this," and you've foregrounded it. If you didn't say that, the audience would be thinking, you've just been put together by a scriptwriter. So it's always good to say these things out loud, and Cusack does, just like Minnie Driver does, about, yeah, I'm your new beginning, aren't I? It's okay to say these things because you're acknowledging it's a work of art, it's a work of fiction, it's artificial, but buckle up and enjoy it because it's good.
Fantastic. On that note, I think we should wrap this episode, Dev. So this was minute 77 of the Grosse Pointe Blank podcast, Debi Radio 79.5 FM, featuring your co-hosts, co-writers, and co-producers, myself, Hugh David, and Dev Sodiger.
Today's guest again was Robert Chandler of Space Age Films. Robert, where can we find more about you and your work?
You can find me on the internet, of course, www.spaceagefilms, as one word, .co.uk.
Fantastic. And you can find more us on all good podcast players, Spotify, Apple Podcast, the whole gamut. You can also find us on YouTube, X, formerly known as Twitter, at Debi Radio, as well as our website, debiradio.com. And for all of those, it is DEBI Radio.
And finally, if you want to come and chat with us, come and find us on Facebook. There's a listeners group. It's called Debi Radio 79.5 FM Fan Club. One last time, that is DEBI Radio.
Sure was clear that all of this was new. Concentrating hard like a little girl, smoking for the first time. It wasn't